August 17, 1943. Newfoundland, Canada, 600 miles north of the nearest American city. A place so remote that most maps didn't bother marking it with anything more than a question mark and a blank space. The sun rose cold over Gander that morning, temperature hovering at 42 degrees. A light fog rolling in from the North Atlantic, carrying with it the smell of salt and aviation fuel and something else, something electric. The kind of morning that changes history. On the massive concrete expanse of runway 23, 127 aircraft sat wing to wing, B-24 Liberators mostly. Their silver fuselages still wet with morning dew, each one painted with factory-fresh paint from California or Texas or Seattle, each one carrying 8,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs, each one destined for a single purpose: to cross the North Atlantic Ocean in winter and deliver American firepower directly to Nazi Germany. The engines began starting at 0500 hours, one by one. Right cyclone radials coughing to life in the pre-dawn darkness. 1,400 horsepower each. The sound building, multiplying, until the entire plateau shook with mechanical thunder. 127 aircraft, over 1 million pounds of explosives, in a single day. And 2,000 miles away in Berlin, a German intelligence officer named Colonel Franz Hartmann would receive a report about this morning that would make his hands shake, because these numbers, these impossible, terrifying numbers, proved something that the German high command refused to believe. Germany had already lost the war. Hitler didn't know it yet. The German people didn't know it. Most Americans didn't even know it. But one man knew, one intelligence officer who had been trying to warn them for 3 solid years, who had documented every aircraft, who had sent hundreds of reports, who had watched the mathematics of defeat compile day by day by day, and Germany had ignored him completely. This is that story. The sky over Gander turned from black to deep blue to pale gray as the sun climbed. Captain William Hayes stood in the control tower, watching the organized chaos below. He was 37 years old that morning, Canadian-born, former bush pilot who'd spent a decade flying supplies to mining camps in the territories. A man who understood cold and distance and the razor-thin margin between living and dying in unforgiving wilderness. He'd been stationed at Gander since early 1941, had made 163 crossings of the North Atlantic, 163 times betting his life that American engineering and Canadian weather science could beat the deadliest ocean on Earth. Today would be crossing number 164. Hayes lifted his coffee cup. The liquid inside had gone cold an hour ago, but he drank it anyway. His eyes tracked the line of aircraft taxiing toward the active runway. He didn't need to count them anymore. The numbers were burned into his memory. 25 in the first wave, 18 in the second, 22 in the third, 15 in the fourth, 12 in the fifth, 35 in the sixth and final wave. 127 total. More bombers than the entire German Luftwaffe could put in the air at this point in the war. More firepower than had existed in the entire world just 10 years earlier. And this was just a Tuesday. Last week they'd launched 104. The week before that, 96. The flow had become routine. Impossible had become normal. Hayes turned to the woman standing beside him. Dr. Sarah Brennan, 28 years old, meteorologist. Mathematician, the woman whose weather predictions had saved more lives than any combat pilot in the war. She was studying a pressure chart, her finger tracing the movement of a high-pressure system sliding east across the Atlantic. Her calculations covered 3 full sheets of paper, barometric readings, wind speeds at altitude, ice formation probabilities, temperature gradients, a symphony of data that would determine whether 127 crews lived or died in the next 12 hours. "Windows holding," she said without looking up, her Boston accent still strong despite 3 years in Canada. "High-pressure bubble moving east at 18 knots. If we launch on schedule, they thread between the low system north and the convergence zone south. 12-hour crossing, winds favorable at 15,000 feet. Hayes nodded. He'd learned to trust her completely. Had to. Because Sarah Brennan didn't guess. She calculated, and her calculations had a 94% accuracy rate. "Confidence level?" he asked. She finally looked up. Her eyes were tired. She'd been awake for 36 hours straight, tracking this weather system, making sure the window would hold. "87%," she said. "That's as good as it gets over the Atlantic in August." Hayes finished his cold coffee. 87% meant 13% chance of catastrophic failure. Meant some of those 127 aircraft might not make it. Meant men would die. But 87% also meant the vast majority would survive, would deliver their cargo, would turn the tide of the war just a little bit more. The mathematics of acceptable loss. "Launch them," Hayes said. "Let me take you back. Let me show you what impossible looked like in 1940. The North Atlantic Ocean, 2,200 miles of the most hostile water on planet Earth. Storm systems that form without warning. Winds that can reach 150 miles per hour. Waves that tower 60 feet high. Water temperature that will kill you in 15 minutes if you go down. And ice. God, the ice. At 15,000 feet altitude, where aircraft fly to avoid the worst weather, the temperature drops to 30 below zero. Moisture in the air freezes instantly on contact with metal. Ice builds up on wings, on propellers, on control surfaces, adding weight, destroying aerodynamics, killing lift. Planes that ice up don't glide down gently. They drop like stones. This was the barrier between North America and Europe, the moat that protected Britain, the killing field that German submarines ruled absolutely. By the summer of 1940, Admiral Dönitz's U-boat wolf packs were sinking Allied merchant ships at a catastrophic rate. Over 1,000 ships destroyed in 1940 alone. Convoys leaving New York with 20 vessels would arrive in Liverpool with 12, or 8, or none. Britain was starving, their factories running out of raw materials, their military running out of everything. Most critically, they were running out of aircraft. The Battle of Britain was raging. Every day the Royal Air Force lost Spitfires and Hurricanes they couldn't replace fast enough. British aircraft factories were being bombed by the Luftwaffe. Production was crippled. The math was simple and terrible. Germany was shooting down British aircraft faster than Britain could build new ones. Enter America. President Roosevelt signed the Lend-Lease Act. American factories began building bombers and fighters for Britain. The assembly lines ran 24 hours a day. Rosie the Riveter became a symbol. Factory workers in San Diego and Seattle and Wichita built aircraft at a pace the world had never seen. One B-24 Liberator every 100 hours. Flying Fortresses rolling off the line in Seattle 3 times a day. P-51 Mustangs in California. Douglas Bostons in Oklahoma. But there was a problem. How do you get these aircraft across the Atlantic Ocean? You could ship them, break them down, pack them in crates, load them on cargo vessels, send the convoy east. Hope the U-boats didn't find you. But shipping took 4 to 6 weeks. Half the convoys were getting torpedoed. The aircraft arrived in pieces, had to be reassembled, tested. Sometimes damaged parts made them unflyable. And Britain didn't have 4 to 6 weeks. Britain had days. So someone proposed something that every military expert said was suicide. Fly them across, fully assembled, fully fueled. Fly them directly from North America to Scotland. Cut the journey from 6 weeks to 10 hours. Deliver operational bombers ready to fight the moment they landed. The military meteorologists were unanimous. Impossible. The North Atlantic in winter is a death trap. Ice storms, hurricane-force winds, no navigation over open water, no radio beacons, no emergency landing options. You go down, you die. Adolf Hitler himself called it meteorologically impossible, and then 7 aircraft took off from a secret airfield in Newfoundland. November 11, 1940, 7 Lockheed Hudson light bombers, twin-engine, fully assembled, fully fueled, heading directly east into a winter storm system that should have killed every single crew. 2,000 miles away, standing on a fishing dock in the coastal village of Bay Roberts, a man watched those 7 bombers disappear into the gray Atlantic sky. His name was Heinrich Adler, 45 years old, tall, weathered face, wire-rimmed spectacles, spoke English with a Swiss accent. To the local fishermen, he was a marine biologist from Zurich, studying seabird migration patterns. He was actually a German spy, Abwehr intelligence officer. Deep cover for 3 years, living in Newfoundland under false identity. His mission was simple: map Allied logistics, identify vulnerabilities, report everything to Berlin. He had a small network, 3 assets: Local recruits who fed him information. The professor, a meteorologist in St. John's who intercepted Allied radio traffic. The railman, an elderly Newfoundlander named Jack Morrison who worked the railway line near Gander Lake and hated British rule enough to help Germany. The cook, an Irish-American named Tommy Sullivan working in the mess hall of the mysterious new airfield that had appeared seemingly overnight in the middle of the Newfoundland wilderness. That airfield had a name, Gander. Adler had been watching it since construction began in 1938, had documented the impossible scale of it, 4 massive concrete runways carved out of boreal forest and swampland, each runway over a mile long, fuel storage capacity for thousands of aircraft, barracks going up, hangars the size of warehouses, the largest airfield in the world by land area, built in the middle of absolutely nothing. Why, that question had kept Adler awake for 2 years. What possible strategic purpose could this serve? It was too remote for defensive operations, too isolated for training. The nearest city was 600 miles away. And then on November 11th, 1940, he got his answer. The message came from the railman, scrawled on thin paper, delivered via dead drop in a fishing village. 7 twin-engine bombers departed Gander 0600 hours, flew east, did not return, no search parties, no wreckage reports. Deliberate departure, fully fueled and armed, mixed civilian and military crew. Adler read the message 3 times. 7 bombers flew east, into the North Atlantic, in November. His first thought was training flight gone wrong, some terrible accident, but the message said no search parties, no rescue operations. That meant it was planned. That meant, no, impossible. You can't fly the Atlantic in winter. The meteorology doesn't allow it. The fuel calculations don't work. The navigation is impossible. Then the professor's intercept arrived that same evening, a decoded Royal Air Force message. 7 Hudsons arrived Prestwick, Scotland, 2100 hours GMT, all aircraft operational. Ferry command is operational. Next wave, December. Adler sat down hard. The cheap chair in his rented room creaked under his weight. His hands were shaking. They're not shipping the planes, they're flying them. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If the Allies could fly bombers across the Atlantic, if they could bypass the U-boat blockade entirely, then Germany's most devastating weapon was suddenly irrelevant. The U-boats controlled the sea, but they couldn't touch the sky. And if American factories could build aircraft faster than they could be shipped, if they could deliver them operational in 10 hours instead of 6 weeks, Adler stood up, paced the small room, his mind racing through the mathematics. 1 U-boat sinks 1 merchant ship carrying maybe 10 aircraft in crates. The U-boat scores a major victory. Germany celebrates. But if those 10 aircraft are not on the ship, if they're flying over the U-boat's head, he sat down at his small desk, lit the kerosene lamp, began encoding a message to his handler in Berlin. Colonel Franz Hartmann, career intelligence officer, the only man in German intelligence who Adler trusted to actually read and understand what he was reporting. The message took 2 hours to encode properly. Adler used the highest security protocols. This was critical intelligence. This was potentially the end of the war. Critical intelligence. Allies have established air ferry route. Newfoundland to Scotland direct. Aircraft delivered operational, not crated. 7 confirmed successful crossings, November 11. This bypasses U-boat interdiction completely. Gander Airfield is the choke point. Recommend immediate action. He signed it with his code designation, Wolf. The message would go out on a Portuguese fishing vessel that made regular runs to Boston. From Boston, it would be routed through South America to neutral contacts in Argentina. From Argentina to a German merchant ship. From the ship to a U-boat. From the U-boat to occupied France. From France to Berlin. Total time, 4 to 6 weeks. By the time Colonel Hartmann read this message, how many more aircraft would have crossed Adler, sealed the encoded message in wax, prepared it for the dead drop? Then he did something unusual for an intelligence officer. He allowed himself a moment of human feeling. He thought about his son, Karl Adler, 22 years old, Luftwaffe fighter pilot, flying Focke-Wulf 190s out of an airfield in occupied France, intercepting British bomber raids. Adler had received a letter from Carl just last week. The mail system was still functioning despite the war. His son's words echoed in his memory. "Father, the British bombers come every night now. We shoot down many, but more always appear. Where do they get so many aircraft? Our intelligence said the convoys were being destroyed. But still they come. I'm afraid, Father. Is that cowardice?" Adler closed his eyes. "No, Carl. That's wisdom. Because if what Adler had just discovered was true, if the Allies were really flying hundreds or thousands of aircraft directly across the Atlantic, then his son would face an endless stream of bombers, and eventually the mathematics would catch up. Eventually, Carl would be the one who didn't come back. The intelligence officer who spent his life gathering information suddenly realized he was documenting the weapon that might kill his own son. He opened his eyes, shook off the emotion. He was a soldier. He had a duty. But that night, Heinrich Adler barely slept. Now, I know many of you watching this served during this era, or your fathers did, your uncles, your brothers. And you might be wondering how you never heard about this place. How did Gander stay secret? How did this massive operation happen without more people knowing? That was exactly the point. It was classified, top secret. Even after the war ended, the full story of what happened at Gander stayed locked away for decades. The Canadian government didn't want the Soviets knowing the details. The Americans wanted to keep the logistics secret. If you have family stories about World War II logistics, about ferrying aircraft or working in Canada during the war, I want to hear them. Leave them in the comments. These stories matter. These men and women deserve to be remembered. Here is what I'm going to show you in the next hour. How 7 aircraft became 127 in a single day. How American factory workers in California connected directly to the bombing of Berlin with nothing but American determination and Canadian weather science. How German spies risked everything to gather intelligence that their own government refused to believe. And how this one airfield, built on a frozen swamp in the middle of nowhere, proved that when America decides to win, nothing on earth can stop us. But first, let me take you back to September 1939. Poland had just fallen. Germany had just proven that their new blitzkrieg tactics could destroy entire nations in weeks. France would be next, then the Low Countries, then France. Britain stood alone. And in the North Atlantic, German U-boats were already hunting. The wolf packs operated in coordinated groups, 5 or 6 submarines working together. They'd spot a convoy, shadow it, wait for nightfall, then strike. Torpedoes in the dark, merchant ships exploding, cargo vessels breaking apart, men screaming in water cold enough to kill in minutes, oil fires burning on the surface. The U-boats were winning, decisively. In 1940 alone, they sank over 4 million tons of Allied shipping. That's more than 1,000 individual ships. Cargo vessels, tankers, troop transports, everything trying to cross from America to Britain. And every ship they sank took weeks or months to replace. Every cargo lost was food that wouldn't feed British civilians, raw materials that wouldn't build British aircraft, ammunition that wouldn't fight German soldiers. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Germany was sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. Britain was losing the Battle of the Atlantic. And if Britain lost the Atlantic, Britain would starve, would run out of fuel, would run out of weapons, would lose. Enter Heinrich Adler's intelligence network. The professor in St. John's was intercepting radio traffic, Allied naval communications, weather reports, convoy schedules. He'd pass the information to Adler, who'd encode it and send it to Berlin. German U-boat command used that intelligence to position their wolf packs, to intercept convoys, to sink ships. Adler's network had Allied blood on its hands. But that was war. That was duty. Adler didn't think about the men drowning in burning oil. He thought about German victory, about his son coming home safe, about doing his job. Until November 11, 1940. The day 7 Lockheed Hudsons took off from Gander and changed everything. The aircraft themselves were unremarkable. Twin-engine light bombers, built by Lockheed in California, designed for coastal patrol and submarine hunting. Range of about 2,000 miles with full fuel tanks, which was just barely enough to cross the Atlantic if everything went perfectly. If the weather cooperated, if the navigation was exact, if the fuel consumption matched calculations. if the winds were favorable, if ice didn't build up too fast, if the engines didn't fail. Too many ifs. But Captain William Hayes and his 6 fellow pilots were betting their lives that American engineering and Canadian weather science could thread all those needles simultaneously. Sarah Brennan had given them the forecast. A narrow window between 2 massive storm systems. High-pressure bubble moving east. If they launched at 0600 hours and flew at 15,000 feet and maintained 180 knots airspeed, they'd slide between the storms. Miss the window by 2 hours and they'd fly into a hurricane. Miss it by 4 hours and they'd ice up and die. Hayes stood on the Gander tarmac at 0530 that morning. November cold, 28 degrees, light snow beginning to fall. The 7 Hudsons sat ready. Engines warming, propellers turning slowly, fuel tanks topped off, every ounce of weight calculated and recalculated. The crews gathered for final briefing. Mixed group, Royal Air Force veterans, civilian ferry pilots, navigators, radio operators, men who'd volunteered for something that might be suicide. The commanding officer kept it brief. Gentlemen, Britain is dying. Every week we delay is another 1,000 civilians dead in the Blitz. We can ship these bombers, takes a month, half gets sunk, or we can fly them, takes 10 hours. All 7 arrive operational, if you make it. Silence. Then a young pilot raised his hand, voice shaking slightly. Sir, nobody's ever flown the Atlantic in November. The weather? The commander cut him off. That's exactly why Hitler thinks it's impossible. That's exactly why we're doing it. Hayes looked at his crew, navigator, radio operator, both young, both scared, both determined. He thought about writing a letter to his wife Margaret back in Vancouver. 3 kids at home. But what would he say? Sorry, honey, a tempting suicide mission. Love you, better to just do it. Come back. Tell her later. At 05:55, Sarah Brennan's voice crackled over the radio. Barometric pressure holding. Window is open. You are go for launch. Hayes climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, ran through the checklist one final time. Everything perfect. Everything ready. At 0600 hours exactly, he pushed the throttles forward. The Hudson's twin Wright Cyclone engines roared. 1,200 horsepower per side. The aircraft rolled forward. Gathered speed, the massive Gander runway stretching ahead. 100 knots, 120, 140. Rotation speed. Hayes pulled back on the yoke. The Hudson lifted. Wheels left concrete. Newfoundland dropped away below. He banked east. Through the cockpit windscreen, endless forest. Then coastline. Then gray ocean. 2,200 miles of it. No turning back now. Behind him, 6 more Hudsons followed. 7 aircraft in loose formation. Climbing to 15,000 feet. Heading into the unknown. Sarah Brennan watched from the control tower. Her calculations said they'd make it. 87% probability, but 13% meant some might die. She'd already lost her brother Michael to this war. Spitfire pilot, shot down over the English Channel by a Messerschmitt 2 months earlier. If her calculations were wrong, if these 7 crews died because of her mistake, she couldn't think about that. She'd done the math. The math was right. The math had to be right. 10 hours. That's how long it would take to know if she'd sent 7 crews to their deaths or if she'd just changed the course of the war. 10 hours of waiting, of tracking weather systems, of updating pressure charts, of praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. And 200 miles away, Heinrich Adler was encoding the message that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because he didn't know it yet, but that message, that warning to Berlin about 7 aircraft flying the impossible Atlantic crossing, would be ignored, dismissed, filed away as unreliable intelligence from an asset who'd clearly made a mistake. Germany would not believe that the Allies could do the impossible, and that disbelief would cost them everything. The 7 Hudsons flew on, into gray sky, into winter cold, into history. January 1941, Berlin, Abwehr headquarters, Prince Albrechtstrasse. The building stood gray and imposing in the winter light. Snow covered the streets outside. Inside, the halls echoed with footsteps and the mechanical clatter of typewriters. The smell of cigarette smoke and old paper hung thick in the air. Colonel Franz Hartmann sat at his desk on the third floor. 52 years old, career intelligence officer, 28 years of service to Germany. A man who believed in facts, not ideology, who trusted mathematics more than propaganda. His office was small but organized. Maps on every wall, filing cabinets packed with intelligence reports from across the globe. A single window that looked out over the snow-covered courtyard where in a few years men would be hanged for treason. But Hartmann didn't know that yet. What he did know, what he held in his hands at that moment, was Heinrich Adler's report from Newfoundland. The message had taken 6 weeks to arrive. 6 weeks traveling through neutral contacts and secret channels. 6 weeks during which the world had continued turning and the war had continued grinding forward. Hartmann read it once, then again, then a third time. His hand reached automatically for his cigarette case, drew one out, lit it. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling while his mind processed what he was reading. 7 aircraft, flown directly across the North Atlantic. In November, successfully. Most intelligence officers would have dismissed it. Fluke, propaganda, experimental flight that got lucky, not worth the paper it was printed on. But Franz Hartmann was not most intelligence officers. He stood, walked to the window, stared out at the falling snow. He'd been to America. 1938. Official visit before the war. The Abwehr had sent him to assess American industrial capacity, to tour factories, to understand what Germany might face if America ever entered the conflict. He'd visited Ford's River Rouge plant in Detroit, had watched in silent awe as an automobile rolled off the assembly line every 63 seconds. Every 63 seconds. A complete car, from raw materials to finished product. The foreman had smiled with pride. We built 14,000 cars last month. Next month, we'll build 15,000. Hartmann had asked the obvious question. How the foreman's answer was simple. We figure out how to do it faster. Then we do it faster. American industrial philosophy in one sentence. Hartmann had written a report about that visit, had tried to explain to the high command what he'd seen, the scale, the efficiency, the terrifying potential. They'd thanked him politely and filed it away. Now standing at his window in Berlin watching snow fall on a city that would soon be burning, Franz Hartmann understood something that his superiors did not. If Americans could build cars that fast, they could build aircraft that fast. And if Heinrich Adler was right, if the Allies had really established an air ferry road across the Atlantic, then that American industrial capacity was about to become Germany's worst nightmare. He returned to his desk, pulled out a large sheet of graph paper, the kind engineers use for technical drawings, precise grid lines, room for detailed plotting. He drew 2 axes, horizontal for time, vertical for quantity. Then he began plotting 2 lines. Line 1, U-boat sinkings of Allied merchant ships. The data was readily available. German Naval Command tracked it obsessively, celebrated every victory. September 1940, 59 ships sunk. October 1940, 63 ships. November 1940, 32 ships. Weather had been bad. Convoys delayed. December 1940, 41 ships. The line went up steadily. The U-boats were winning. Line 2, aircraft delivered via air ferry. November 1940, 7 aircraft. Adler's report. December 1940, 12 aircraft. Follow-up intelligence from the professor. January 1941, 18 aircraft. Latest intercept. Hartmann stared at the graph. 2 lines, one going up slowly, one going up fast, and the mathematics, the cold, brutal mathematics, told him everything he needed to know. He did the calculation, wrote it out longhand so there could be no mistake. 1 U-boat sinks 1 merchant ship. That ship might carry 10 aircraft, packed in crates, disassembled. If the ship sinks, Germany celebrates. 10 enemy aircraft destroyed. But if those 10 aircraft aren't on the ship, if they're flying over the ocean at 15,000 feet, the U-boat never even knows they exist. And if American factories can build aircraft faster than they can be shipped, if delivery time drops from 6 weeks to 10 hours, Hartmann stubbed out his cigarette, lit another immediately. The implications were staggering. Germany's entire naval strategy, the Wolfpack tactics that were supposed to starve Britain into surrender, suddenly became irrelevant to aircraft supply. The U-boats controlled the sea, but they couldn't touch the sky. He spent 3 days preparing his report, made it precise, factual, no emotional language, just data and analysis. The kind of report that senior officers couldn't dismiss as alarmist. Strategic assessment of Allied air ferry operations. He laid out the evidence, Adler's reports, radio intercepts from the professor, photographic intelligence showing construction at Gander. Everything documented, everything verified. Then he made his projection. If this pattern continues, Allied aircraft deliveries will exceed U-boat interdiction capacity by spring 1941. American industrial production combined with air ferry route creates insurmountable advantage in aircraft supply to Britain. He didn't say Germany would lose. You couldn't say that in a report to the High Command. Not in 1941 when Germany was winning everywhere else. But the implication was clear in the numbers. February 15, 1941. Hartmann presented his findings to the General Staff. The meeting room was all dark wood and cigarette smoke. Senior officers in perfect uniforms. Maps of Europe showing German conquests in black arrows. Hartmann stood at the front, presented his graph, explained the mathematics. The generals listened politely. Then the senior officers spoke. General Major von Clausen, career military, loyal party member. Colonel Hartmann, you're suggesting we've already lost, based on reports from a single agent. We cannot verify. 7 aircraft proved nothing. This is speculation at best, defeatism at worst. Hartmann kept his voice level. Herr General, the mathematics. The general cut him off. The mathematics show that Germany is winning everywhere. Poland fell in weeks, France in months. Britain is next. You will revise this assessment to reflect reality, or you will be removed from active intelligence analysis. Do you understand? Hartmann understood perfectly. He returned to his office, filed his report in his personal archive, began keeping a separate set of records. Documentation that would prove someday that German intelligence had known the truth. That night, he went home to his wife, Martha. Their apartment was small, but warm. Martha had dinner waiting, potato soup and dark bread. Luxuries were already becoming scarce in Berlin, but she managed. She took one look at his face and knew. What happened? Hartmann sat heavily at the kitchen table. I've just proven we're going to lose the war, and no one will listen. Martha sat across from him. 48 years old, former librarian, a woman who understood the power of documentation, who'd been quietly keeping her own records, newspaper clippings about disappearances, about deportations, about things that made her sick to witness. How long, she asked quietly. Hartmann thought about his graph, about American production capacity, about the mathematics of industrial war. If my numbers are right, Allied strategic bombing campaign will cripple our production by 1943, invasion of Europe by 1944. We're already beaten. The war will just continue until everyone realizes it. They sat in silence, 2 people who understood that truth and power were not the same thing. Martha reached across the table, took his hand. Our son, she said. Ernst, he's talking about volunteering. Wehrmacht, he thinks it's his duty. Hartmann closed his eyes. Ernst was 19 years old. Bright, idealistic, believed everything the propaganda told him. Try to talk him out of it, Hartmann said, but he knew it wouldn't work. The young always think they're immortal. Let me show you what Hartmann was calculating. Let me take you to where those numbers were coming from. San Diego, California. Summer 1941. Consolidated Aircraft Factory. The building stretched for acres. Corrugated metal walls. Skylights letting in California sun. Inside, the noise was constant. Riveting. Hammering. The whine of metal cutting tools. Radial engines being tested. And on the assembly line, B-24 Liberators taking shape. The Liberator was America's answer to strategic bombing. 4-engine heavy bomber. 10-man crew, 8,000-pound bomb capacity. Range of 2,000 miles with full load. And America was building them as fast as Ford built cars. Rosa Martinez stood at her station. 32 years old, dark hair tied back in a red bandana. Rosie the Riveter incarnate. Her husband was serving in the Pacific. Navy gunner on a destroyer. Every rivet she drove brought him home sooner. That's how she thought about it. The B-24 fuselage moved past her on the line. She had 90 seconds to complete her section. 42 rivets, specific pattern, had to be perfect or the whole aircraft was compromised. She'd done this 8,000 times, could do it in her sleep. The bomber moved on, next station, next worker, next component. 100 hours after the first metal was cut, a complete B-24 Liberator rolled out the factory door, silver skin gleaming, 4 Wright Cyclone engines, ready to fly. But it wasn't ready to fight yet. It had to cross a continent and then an ocean. Enter Jim Crawford, 38 years old, ferry pilot, Texas-born, wore a battered cowboy hat even in the cockpit. Former barnstormer who'd spent the Depression doing air shows for county fairs. Now he was delivering bombers. Crawford walked around the fresh B-24, did his pre-flight inspection, ran his hand along the aluminum skin, still warm from the California sun. "Beautiful bird," he said to the ground crew chief. "You boys did good work." The chief smiled with pride. "We built her in 4 days. Yesterday we built 3. Crawford climbed into the cockpit, fired up the engines one by one, felt the power thrumming through the airframe. 1,200 horsepower per engine, 4,800 total. He'd fly this bomber from San Diego to Phoenix, Phoenix to Kansas City, Kansas City to Cleveland, Cleveland to Montreal, Montreal to Gander. 4 days of flying, 3,200 miles. And then from Gander, across the impossible Atlantic. Crawford had a son back home, Danny, 10 years old, built model airplanes, wrote letters to his dad. The latest one was folded in Crawford's shirt pocket. "Dad, are you really fighting Hitler? My teacher says you're a hero. When are you coming home? I miss you." Crawford had written back. "Son, I'm not a soldier. I'm just a mailman, but I'm delivering some very important mail. Every plane I fly across that ocean is one more way to stop the bad guys and bring all our boys home, including me. Love you, buddy." He pushed the throttles forward. The B-24 rolled down the runway, lifted into clear blue California sky. Destination Gander, Newfoundland, and eventually the war. Back at Gander, the transformation was complete. What had been a remote outpost in 1940 was now a military city in 1941. 2,500 personnel. Americans, Canadians, British, Free French, Poles who'd escaped when Germany invaded, and on working toward one goal: keep the aircraft flowing. The hangars never slept. 3 shifts, 24-hour operations. Mechanics working by floodlight at 3 in the morning. Fuel trucks running constantly. Supply convoys arriving from Halifax every other day. And Sarah Brennan's weather station had become the most sophisticated meteorological operation in the North Atlantic. She'd built a team, 6 meteorologists, young men mostly classified 4F for military service, bad eyesight or flat feet or heart murmurs, men who couldn't fight but could calculate. They launched weather balloons every 6 hours, tracked pressure systems across the entire Atlantic, had radio contact with stations in Greenland, Iceland, Scotland, created a network of data that turned chaos into prediction. Brennan stood at the plotting table, 29 years old now, dark circles under her eyes from too many late nights, coffee cup permanently attached to her hand. The table showed the entire North Atlantic, pressure systems drawn in grease pencil, high pressure in blue, low pressure in red, fronts marked with symbols, wind speeds noted at altitude. It looked like abstract art. But to Brennan, it was a language, a code she could read. Her assistant, a young man named Robert Chen, pointed to a developing system west of Iceland. That low is deepening. Pressure dropped 8 millibars in 6 hours. Brennan studied it, did the mental calculation. It'll track northeast, miss the main route by 200 miles. We're clear for the next 18 hours. Chen made the notation. Brennan picked up the radio transmitter. "Gander Tower, this is weather station. Window is open. Recommend launch sequence Alpha. 18-hour window. Winds favorable at 15,000 feet. Captain Hayes' voice crackled back. "Copy weather station. Launching 32 aircraft starting 0600. 32 aircraft. In 1 day." Brennan remembered when 7 had seemed impossible. That had been just 4 months ago. Now 32 was routine. The flow had become industrial, predictable, a machine that converted American production into European air power with 94% reliability. But that 6% failure rate haunted her, because 6% of 32 aircraft meant 2 bombers wouldn't make it. 20 men in the water, in the cold, in the dark. She'd lost count of how many men her weather predictions had saved. Hundreds, maybe thousands. But she remembered every single one she'd lost. February 11th, 1942. That was the worst day. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Let me take you to the mess hall. Because there's someone there who's watching, who's counting, who's sending every number back to Berlin. Tommy Sullivan worked the breakfast shift. 32 years old, Irish-American. Boston-born, came to Gander in March 1941 looking for work. Got hired as mess hall cook. Perfect cover for a German intelligence asset. Sullivan had been recruited in Boston back in 1938, before the war started, before anyone knew what was coming. The recruiter had been smooth, professional, appealed to Sullivan's Irish heritage, to his hatred of British imperialism, to his belief that Ireland should be free. Germany will liberate Ireland, the man had said. We need his information. Simple observations. You'd be helping free your ancestral homeland. Sullivan had believed it, had signed up, had been given training in codes and radio operation and dead drops. Then he'd been told to get a job at Gander. To watch, to count, to report. And for 9 months, that's exactly what he'd done. His station was perfect. Kitchen window overlooking the main runway. Every morning he cooked eggs and bacon and pancakes for the ferry crews. Every morning he watched aircraft taxi and launch. And every night he encoded the numbers. Sent them via dead drop to the railman, who passed them to Adler, who sent them to Berlin. March 1941, 35 aircraft. April 1941, 42 aircraft. May 1941, 51 aircraft. June 1941, 67 aircraft. July 1941, 83 aircraft. The numbers kept climbing. The flow kept accelerating. Sullivan stood at the kitchen window watching the August launches, counted under his breath, marked them on his mental tally. 1, 2, 3, B-24 Liberators, 4, 5, 6, Hudson Bombers, 7, 8, Douglas Bostons. The line never ended. He'd gotten to know some of the crews. Hard not to when you serve them breakfast every morning. Captain Hayes always said thank you, always polite, always looked tired but determined. Sarah Brennan sometimes ate in the kitchen when the mess hall was too crowded. She'd talk about weather patterns while Sullivan fried eggs. He'd actually learned to read basic pressure systems from listening to her. And the crews themselves. Farm boys from Kansas, factory workers from Detroit, kids barely 20 years old who joked and laughed and were scared shitless but didn't show it. They weren't faceless enemies. They were people. Good people. And Sullivan was helping Germany kill them. That thought had started keeping him awake at night. Then in August 1941, he received a different kind of message. It came through the usual dead drop, encoded on thin paper. But the content was new. Intelligence valuable. Action required. Identify fuel storage locations. Document guard rotation schedules. Prepare detailed facility maps. Demolition team arriving October. Target maximum operational disruption. Sullivan read it 3 times. They wanted him to help sabotage Gander. Counting aircraft was one thing. Providing intelligence was one thing. Helping murder people, that was something else entirely. He thought about Captain Hayes, about Sarah Brennan, about the kid from Iowa who always asked for extra bacon and talked about his girl back home. He thought about the rumors he'd been hearing, whispered conversations among the crews, about concentration camps, about mass deportations, about what the Nazis were really doing in Europe. He'd dismissed them as propaganda. But what if they weren't at? What if he was on the wrong side? Sullivan sat in his small room that night, the encoded message in his hand, a choice in front of him. Help the sabotage, follow orders, hope Germany won and Ireland would be free, or refuse, and face whatever consequences came. His family was still in Boston. The Germans knew where they lived, knew their names, knew how to hurt them. But if he helped murder the men at Gander, could he live with that? He made his decision. He'd respond to Berlin that he received the message, that he'd provide the intelligence they requested. And then he'd provide wrong intelligence. Fuel storage locations. He'd give them coordinates for empty fields. Guard rotations. He'd report schedules 4 hours off. Access routes. He'd mark the most heavily patrolled areas as lightly guarded. He'd sabotage the sabotage. It was dangerous. If Berlin figured it out, his family would pay. If the Canadians caught him, he'd hang as a But he couldn't help murder Captain Hayes. Couldn't help kill Sarah Brennan. Couldn't be responsible for dead kids from Iowa who just wanted to go home. Some lines you don't cross. Even in war, Tommy Sullivan encoded his response. Acknowledged the sabotage mission, promised detailed intelligence, and prayed that when the German demolition team arrived the forest and the cold and his false maps would do what his conscience couldn't. Stop them without exposing himself. It was a desperate plan, a dangerous plan, but it was all he had. Now let me pull back. Let me show you what this looked like from above. Because by summer 1941, Gander wasn't alone anymore. The Allies had opened multiple ferry routes. Main route, Gander to Prestwick, Scotland. The workhorse handled 60% of all traffic. Northern route, via Greenland and Iceland, for when Atlantic weather closed the main route. Southern route, via Bermuda and Azores, still being developed. Would open fully in 1942, but Gander remained the crown jewel, the highest capacity, the most efficient, the beating heart of the air bridge, and the aircraft types were evolving. 1940, mostly light bombers, Lockheed Hudsons, Douglas Bostons, twin-engine, medium range. 1941, heavy bombers appearing, B-24 Liberators, B-17 Flying Fortresses, 4 engine monsters capable of reaching Berlin. 1942, coming soon, strategic bombers with even longer range, P-51 Mustang fighters fitted with ferry tanks, everything the Allies needed to dominate European skies. This wasn't just resupply. This was building the weapon that would destroy Nazi Germany. Strategic air power. Every aircraft that crossed from Gander was one more bomber for the combined bomber offensive. One more fighter to protect those bombers. One more nail in Hitler's coffin. And the hammer was just getting started. I want to pause here because we're approaching the halfway point of this story, and I want to hear from you. A lot of you watching this lived through this era. You remember when America mobilized for total war, when factories ran 3 shifts, when everyone contributed, when the whole country pulled in one direction. My question for you is this. What do you remember most about that time? The unity, the sacrifice, the absolute determination to win, no matter what it cost? Leave your memories in the comments. Share your family stories. Because that's what this story is really about. It's not just about tactics and logistics and numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about the American spirit that looked at an impossible ocean and said, we'll fly over it anyway. That looked at Nazi Germany and said, you picked the wrong fight. That looked at tyranny and said, not on our watch. That spirit won the war. That spirit built Gander. That spirit sent 20,000 aircraft across an ocean that experts said couldn't be crossed. And that spirit is what makes America exceptional. Now let's get to 1942, because the Germans are about to try something desperate. They're going to attempt what they should have attempted in 1940. They're going to try to destroy Gander, and one Irish-American cook is about to bet everything that he's chosen the right side. October 15th, 1941, 30 miles off the Newfoundland coast, the North Atlantic under a moonless sky. The surface was black glass, rolling swells moving in the darkness. Water temperature 42 degrees, cold enough to kill a man in 20 minutes. The U-boat surfaced with barely a sound, water streaming off the conning tower. Hatches opening, 3 men emerging into the freezing night air. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, 32 years old, demolitions expert, trained at the Wehrmacht Engineering School in Munich, a professional who understood explosives the way a surgeon understands anatomy. Feldwebel Ernst Bauer, 28, commando, hard as winter steel, had fought in Poland and France. Volunteered for this mission because he was bored with occupation duty. Matrose Hans Weber, 24, radio operator, youngest of the 3, scared but hiding it well. They had one mission, infiltrate Gander Airfield, place timed explosives on fuel storage tanks. Detonate during morning launch operations. Maximum casualties. Maximum disruption. The intelligence package from Shamrock had been detailed. Maps showing easy approach routes through light security zones, guard rotation schedules, fuel tank locations marked precisely. Everything they needed. The inflatable raft went over the side. The three men climbed down, their equipment sealed in waterproof containers. Explosives, detonators, radio, weapons, food for 5 days. The U-boat captain leaned over the rail. Good luck. We'll wait 48 hours offshore for extraction signal. After that, we dive and head home. Don't miss the window. Richter nodded. The raft pushed off, oars dipping into black water. The U-boat's hatches closed. The submarine slid beneath the surface like it had never been there. The three Germans rowed toward shore, toward a mission that would fail before it even began, because Tommy Sullivan had given them maps that led nowhere, schedules that were wrong, guard patterns that didn't exist. The trap was set. Sullivan just didn't know the Canadians were setting a bigger one. The shore materialized out of darkness. Rocky beach, dense forest beyond, the smell of spruce and salt water. The three men dragged their raft above the tide line, covered it with branches, cached their waterproof gear, checked their maps. According to Shamrock's intelligence, they were 12 miles from Gander, an easy one-day march through light forest on an old logging trail. Richter studied the map by shielded flashlight. We move at first light, reach the perimeter by tomorrow evening, insert under cover of darkness, place charges, extract to coast, signal for pickup. Bauer checked his weapon, a Walther P-38 pistol, suppressed, for silent killing if necessary. What if we encounter patrols? Richter's answer was cold and professional. Avoid if possible. Eliminate if necessary. Mission success is priority. They settled in to wait for dawn, ate cold rations, tried to sleep in this freezing wind coming off the Atlantic. None of them slept well. Dawn came gray and cold. The three Germans packed their gear and began moving inland, following Sullivan's map, following the route that was supposed to be an easy trail. What they found was swamp. The logging trail didn't exist, or if it had existed once nature had reclaimed it decades ago. What the map showed as clear path was actually dense undergrowth, standing water and terrain that fought every step. Progress that should have taken 8 hours took 3 days. Bauer was the first to voice suspicion. This doesn't match the intelligence. We should have been there by now. Richter checked and rechecked the map. The compass bearing was correct. They were following the route exactly. Either the intelligence is old or it's wrong. Keep moving. By October 18th, they were exhausted, wet, cold, lost in forests that seemed designed to kill them, and they still hadn't reached Gander. Meanwhile, Captain David Morrison of Canadian Army Intelligence sat in his office at Gander, reading intercepts. Morrison was 34 years old, sharp, methodical, had been tracking German intelligence activities in North America since 1939, and thanks to Ultra, the British code-breaking operation that had cracked the German Enigma cipher. Morrison had been reading German communications for months. He knew about the sabotage mission, had known since August when Berlin first authorized it, had watched the plan develop, had read every message, including the intelligence package that Shamrock had sent. Morrison had maps spread on his desk, the real maps of Gander's security, and Sullivan's false maps that had gone to Berlin. He smiled grimly. Whoever this Shamrock is, he's either incompetent or he's playing both sides. Morrison's assessment was that Shamrock was compromised, possibly a double agent, possibly just feeding bad intelligence to protect himself. Either way, the German sabotage team was walking into wilderness with maps that would lead them nowhere near their target. But Morrison wasn't taking chances. He'd reinforced perimeter patrols, put extra guards on fuel storage, briefed his men to watch for suspicious activity, and he'd set tripwires. Literally, thin cables strung across the actual approach routes, connected to flares. Anyone trying to infiltrate would announce themselves. The trap was ready. October 19th, 0200 hours. The German team finally reached Gander's perimeter. 3 days late, exhausted, frustrated, but still mission-focused. They had approached from the northwest. According to Sullivan's map, this was a lightly patrolled zone, Minimal security, easy penetration. Richter surveyed the fence line through binoculars, spotted the wire, the guard towers, the floodlights on tall poles. This doesn't look lightly patrolled. Bauer agreed. The intelligence said minimal security here. I count 3 guard posts within visual range. But they'd come this far. Mission had to proceed. Richter made the decision. We go through, fast and quiet, place charges on first accessible fuel tanks, detonate and extract, move. They approached the fence, found the sections Sullivan's map had marked as unmonitored. Bauer pulled out wire cutters, started cutting. The fence parted with small metallic pings, 1 wire, 2, 3. They were halfway through when the floodlights hit them. Blinding white light, sirens wailing, voices shouting through loudspeakers. You are surrounded. Drop your weapons. Hands on your head. Do not move or you will be shot. Bauer's training kicked in. He went for his pistol. Got it halfway out of the holster before Canadian rifle fire cracked through the night. The first round hit him in the shoulder. Spun him around. The second round hit his leg. He went down hard. Richter and Weber froze, hands going up automatically. Canadian soldiers poured out of the darkness. 20 of them, rifles trained, professional, controlled. Morrison walked up slowly, looked at the 3 Germans, at Bauer bleeding on the ground, at the wire cutters, at the equipment packs. Well, he said quietly, the saboteurs finally arrive. 3 days late and in exactly the wrong place. He turned to his sergeant. Medical attention for the wounded one. Take all 3 into custody. I want everything they're carrying. Maps, codes, equipment, everything. The interrogation began at dawn. Morrison sat across from Richter in a small concrete room. 2 chairs, 1 table, 1 light bulb. Morrison spoke fluent German. That surprised Richter. You were betrayed, Morrison said. Your intelligence was false. The maps were wrong. The guard schedules were wrong. Everything Shamrock gave you was designed to lead you into a trap. Richter said nothing. We've been reading your communications for months. We knew you were coming. We knew your mission. We let you walk into the wilderness and exhaust yourselves before you even reached the fence. Still nothing from Richter. Morrison leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You'll tell me everything about Shamrock, how you contact him, what codes you use, what intelligence he's provided, or you'll sit in a Canadian military prison until this war ends. And given how the war is going, that could be a very long time. Richter finally spoke. I know nothing about Shamrock except his code name. All contact was through Berlin. I was given maps and schedules. I followed orders. Morrison believed him. The Germans compartmentalized their operations well. Field teams didn't know sources, but the interrogation revealed one useful piece of information. The method Shamrock used to pass intelligence. Dead drops, coded messages, timing patterns. Morrison filed it all away, began planning the mole hunt. Meanwhile, Tommy Sullivan was cooking breakfast and trying not to vomit from fear. He'd heard about the capture. Everyone at Gander had heard. 3 German saboteurs caught trying to infiltrate the base. 1 wounded, all in custody. Sullivan knew it was his intelligence they'd been following. His false maps, his wrong guard schedules, which meant it had worked. He'd sabotaged the sabotage. The Germans had failed. But now Canadian intelligence would be looking for the leak, looking for Shamrock. Sullivan cracked eggs onto the griddle with shaking hands, tried to act normal, tried to breathe. Captain Hayes came through the breakfast line. Morning, Tommy. Heard the excitement last night. Sullivan managed a smile. Crazy stuff, sir. Germans trying to blow up the base. Hayes took his eggs and toast. Makes you wonder how they knew where to look. Someone must have given them intelligence. Sullivan's heart stopped. Did Hayes suspect was this a test, but Hayes just smiled tiredly and moved on to find a table. Sullivan exhaled slowly, kept cooking, kept pretending. 3 days later, the knock came. January 20th, 1942. Sullivan was cleaning the kitchen after breakfast shift when Morrison appeared in the doorway. Tommy Sullivan, come with me, please. Sullivan's legs nearly gave out. This was it. They'd figured it out. He was dead. He followed Morrison to a small office. Morrison closed the door, gestured to a chair. Sit. Sullivan sat, tried to keep his hands from shaking. Morrison placed a photograph on the desk. The 3 German saboteurs, taken after capture. These men came looking for someone codenamed Shamrock. Irish codename. You're Irish, Tommy. Sullivan's mouth went dry. I was born in Boston, sir. I'm American. Morrison nodded. I know. I've checked your background thoroughly. You came to Gander looking for work in March 41. Got hired as a cook. You're good at your job. Keep to yourself. Never cause trouble. Sullivan said nothing. Waited. Morrison placed a second photograph on the desk. A map. Sullivan's false map that had been found on the Germans. This map led those men into a swamp. 3 days wandering lost. The guard schedules they carried were 4 hours off. The fuel tank locations were in empty fields. Morrison looked directly at Sullivan. Someone gave them completely false intelligence. Either an incompetent source or someone deliberately sabotaging their mission. Sullivan met Morrison's eyes. Made a decision. I gave them false intelligence, sir. He said it quietly, simply. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Why? Sullivan took a breath. Because I was recruited in Boston, 38. Before the war, they told me I'd be helping free Ireland. Told me Germany would liberate my ancestral homeland. I believed them. I was young and stupid, and I believed them. He continued. They sent me here to count aircraft and report numbers. I did that for months. Then they asked me to help sabotage, to help murder people. And I couldn't do it, sir. I couldn't help kill Captain Hayes or Ms. Brennan or any of the crews. So I sent them false intelligence. Hoped they'd get lost or caught. Hoped I could stop them without exposing myself. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Your family is in Boston, sir. They know where my family lives. They threatened them if I refused. Morrison nodded slowly. I could arrest you right now. Court-martial. Espionage carries the death penalty. Sullivan's voice was barely a whisper. I know, sir. But Morrison continued, you also sabotaged an enemy operation. Sent 3 German agents into a trap. Prevented an attack that could have killed dozens of our personnel. He leaned forward. Here's your choice, Sullivan. I arrest you and you hang. Or you work for me, completely. Any German contact that resurfaces, you report it immediately. You feed them exactly what I tell you to feed them. You become a double agent. Official. Controlled. And we protect your family. Witness protection if needed. Sullivan looked up. You'd let me stay. Morrison's expression was hard. I'd let you stay because you're more useful to me alive and working than dead and martyred. But one slip, one deception, one contact with Germany you don't report. You hang. Understood. Yes, sir. Completely. Deal. Morrison stood, extended his hand. Welcome to Canadian intelligence, Mr. Sullivan. Don't make me regret this. Sullivan shook his hand, felt something like redemption, something like hope. He'd chosen a side, finally, completely, and maybe, just maybe, he could help win this war from the right side of history. Now let me take you back to Berlin, because while Sullivan was making his choice, Colonel Hartmann was facing his own crisis. December 1941. Hartmann's office, the snow falling heavy outside. 3 reports landed on his desk within 1 week. Report 1. Sabotage team captured at Gander. Mission failed. Agent Shamrock believed compromised or turned. Report 2. Aircraft deliveries via Gander continuing to accelerate. November total 280 aircraft. December projection 350. Report 3. 10,000th aircraft has crossed the Atlantic via air ferry operations. 10,000 aircraft in just over a year. Hartmann sat alone in his office, updated his graph. The 2 lines had diverged completely. U-boat sinkings, still occurring, but the rate was stabilizing. The Allies had improved their convoy tactics, introduced better anti-submarine warfare. The U-boats were still dangerous, but no longer dominant. Aircraft deliveries, exponential curve upward. 350 aircraft per month, over 4,000 per year, and accelerating. Hartmann did the mathematics, wrote it out carefully. Current German Luftwaffe strength, approximately 4,000 combat aircraft across all fronts. Allied aircraft delivery rate via air ferry, 4,000 per year, plus British domestic production, plus aircraft being shipped despite U-boat threat. The Allied replacement rate exceeded German total strength. It wasn't even close anymore. Hartmann wrote a new report. made it even more explicit than his previous warnings. Strategic assessment, Allied air ferry operations. December 1941. He laid out everything. The 10,000 aircraft milestone, the acceleration pattern, the infrastructure expansion at Gander and sister bases, the impossibility of interdiction. Then he made his conclusions stark and undeniable. The Atlantic air bridge cannot be stopped. American industrial capacity has created an insurmountable advantage. Strategic bombing of Germany is now inevitable. Air superiority over Europe will be achieved by Allied forces within 18 months. Recommend immediate reallocation of resources to homeland defense and preparation of civilian populations for sustained bombing campaign. He knew what would happen when he submitted it. Knew exactly. But intelligence officers report truth. That's the job. January 15th, 1942. Hartman presented his findings to the General Staff. The same room, the same dark wood and cigarette smoke, the same senior officers who'd dismissed him before. He showed them the graph, explained the numbers, made his case methodically. The response was predictable. General Major von Clausen stood. Colonel Hartman, this report constitutes defeatism, bordering on treason. You will revise this assessment immediately or face disciplinary action. The Führer will not tolerate such pessimism from intelligence officers. Hartman kept his voice level. General, these are facts, mathematics. The numbers don't lie. The general's face reddened. The numbers show Germany winning on every front. Russia will fall. Britain will surrender. You will revise this report or you will be removed from your position. Do you understand? Hartman understood perfectly. He gathered his papers, walked out of that meeting knowing he'd done his duty and knowing it didn't matter. Germany would ignore the truth until the truth destroyed them. He returned to his office, filed his report in his secret archive. The documentation that would prove German intelligence had known. That night, Martha found him staring at nothing. They rejected it again, she said. Not a question, a statement. They called it defeatism. Martha sat beside him. Our son volunteered today. Wehrmacht infantry. They're sending him to the Eastern Front. Ukraine, he reports in 2 weeks. Hartman closed his eyes. Ernst, 19 years old, bright, idealistic, about to die in a war that was already lost. I tried to talk to him, Martha continued. Tried to tell him to wait. He said it was his duty. Said Germany needed him. They sat in silence, two people who knew the truth, who understood that Ernst's sacrifice would change nothing, would mean nothing, would just add one more name to the endless list of the dead. Hartman made a decision that night. He began keeping a second journal, hidden, coded, documenting not just intelligence but crimes, deportations, disappearances, everything that would matter when the trials came, because trials would come. Hartman knew that now. Germany would lose. The regime would fall, and someone needed to document what had happened. Someone needed to bear witness. Martha revealed her own secret that night, her own hidden journal, newspaper clippings, observations, names of people who vanished. They looked at each other. Two archivists of atrocity, different records, same purpose. Survey, document, testify. If we're arrested, Hartman said, Pastor Dietrich at St. Marcus Church has instructions. He'll get you out, get you to Switzerland. Martha nodded, showed him her hiding place, behind a loose brick in the cellar, where her journal lived. We'll survive this, she said. We have to. Someone has to tell the truth when it's over. Hartman held her, two people keeping light alive and gathering darkness. Now let me show you the human cost. Let me show you what those numbers on Hartman's graph actually meant. February 11th, 1942. Gander, Newfoundland. Jim Crawford stood in the mess hall eating breakfast. Eggs and bacon, courtesy of Tommy Sullivan. His cowboy hat sitting on the table beside his tray. Crawford had made 46 Atlantic crossings, 46 times tempting fate over that gray ocean, 46 times coming back alive. Today would be crossing number 47. He pulled a photograph from his shirt pocket. His son Danny, 10 years old, holding a model B-24 Liberator. The model looked exactly like the real thing. Danny had painted it perfectly. Sullivan refilled Crawford's coffee. Your boy Crawford smiled. Danny, he's 10, builds these models. This one took him 3 weeks. Every rivet, Every panel line, "Kid's got a gift." "That's real nice, Mr. Crawford." Crawford tucked the photo back in his pocket. "He wrote me last week, asked if I'm really fighting Hitler. Told him, yeah, buddy, every day. Every plane I fly is one more step toward bringing all our boys home." He finished his coffee, stood, put on his cowboy hat. "See you in 2 weeks, Tommy." 2 weeks was the standard turnaround. Fly a bomber from Gander to Scotland. Take a ferry ship back to Montreal. Pick up another bomber. Repeat. Crawford had it down to a science. He walked out to the tarmac. His B-24 Liberator sat ready, silver skin gleaming in weak February sun. 4 Wright Cyclone engines, his crew already aboard. Navigator, co-pilot, radio operator, engineer, flight engineer, 6 men total for the ferry flight. Skeleton crew. Captain Hayes was doing the weather brief. "Windows narrow today, 8-hour span. After that, a major system moves in from the west. Miss the window and you're grounded for 3 days minimum." Crawford nodded, studied the weather charts. The route was clear, high pressure holding, winds favorable at altitude. 85% confidence, Sarah Brennan added. Good odds. Crawford climbed aboard, ran through pre-flight, everything perfect, fuel tanks topped off, oil pressure good, magnetos checked, control surfaces free and responsive. At 0730, he pushed the throttles forward. The Liberator rolled down runway 23, gathered speed, rotation, lift off. Newfoundland dropped away below. The ocean ahead. Crawford settled into the rhythm. Trimmed the aircraft for cruise. Climbed to 15,000 feet. Set course for Scotland. 5 hours and everything was perfect. 6 hours and engine number 3 started running rough. The engineer caught it first. Number 3 cylinder head temp rising. Oil pressure dropping. Crawford checked the gauges. The engineer was right. Engine 3 was sick. Ice in the fuel line probably. Common problem over the North Atlantic. Usually you could clear it by adjusting mixture and throttle settings. Crawford tried. The engine didn't respond. Actually got worse. Cylinder head temperature spiked into the red. Oil pressure dropped to 0. "Feather number 3, Crawford ordered. The engineer hit the feather button. The propeller blades twisted edge on to reduce drag. The engine stopped. 3 engines. They could make it on 3 engines. Liberators were tough birds. But the weight was wrong now, the asymmetric thrust pulling them left. Crawford compensated with rudder trim. Adjusted power on the remaining engines. They could make it. Probably, if nothing else went wrong. 7 hours in engine number 2 started showing the same symptoms. Cylinder head temp rising. Oil pressure falling. Crawford felt his stomach drop. 1 engine out was manageable. 2 engines out on the same side was critical. He tried the same adjustments. Mixture, throttle, nothing worked. Engine 2 temperature spiked. Hit maximum. Started smoking. Shut it down. Feather it. Now, the engineer complied. 2 engines out. Port side. The Liberator started losing altitude despite full power on the starboard engines. They were 800 miles from Scotland, 600 miles from the nearest land, and they were going down. Crawford keyed the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Baker 247, position 52 north 35 west. 2 engines out, unable to maintain altitude. Ditching, he turned to his crew. Life vests on. Prepare for water landing. We go in smooth and we all walk away. Stay calm." The ocean was coming up fast. Gray water, white caps, waves 6 feet high. Crawford had practiced this. Every ferry pilot practiced ditching procedures. But practicing in a simulator and doing it for real over freezing Atlantic water were very different things. He aimed for the space between wave sets, kept the nose up, let the tail touch first. The impact was brutal, like hitting concrete. The fuselage buckled. Water exploded through every seam, but they were down, floating. For now. Emergency exit. Move, move, move. The crew scrambled out through the beach hatch, into the life raft. 6 men in a rubber boat designed for 4. The Liberator stayed afloat for maybe 3 minutes. Then the nose dipped. Water poured into the cockpit. The aircraft slid beneath the surface with a sound like a sigh. Crawford watched it go. Thought about Danny's model. Thought about his son's question. Are you really fighting Hitler, Dad? Yeah, buddy, right up until the end. The radio beacon in the life raft was transmitting, sending their position. But they were 600 miles from land in February Atlantic water. Rescue would take days, if it came at all. Water temperature was 40 degrees. Air temperature, 35. The men huddled together for warmth. Crawford's last transmission before ditching had given their position. 52 north, 35 west. At Gander, Sarah Brennan received the distress call, immediately calculated the nearest rescue assets. A Royal Navy corvette, 200 miles south, could reach them in 14 hours if they diverted at full speed. She got on the radio, contacted the corvette, gave them coordinates. The corvette turned north, pushed engines to maximum, 14 hours. The men in the life raft had maybe 18 hours before hypothermia killed them. It was going to be close.